Wait for me there. I shall not fail to join you. To stand beside you in that quiet, shadowed valley. From an exequy on the death of his wife by Henry King, Bishop of Chichester. Unfortunate and enigmatic spirit, lost amid the dazzling light of your own imagination, and consumed in the fire of your own youthful passions. Once again, in the theater of my mind, you stand before me. I see you not as you now rest, in the stillness of that cold veil of death, but as you ought to have been, alive, splendid, and prodigal with the treasures of your magnificent meditations, wandering endlessly through that dreamlike city of shadows, your own Venice. A city beloved by the stars, a paradise floating upon the sea, its broad Palladian windows gazing down, with an expression both deep and sorrowful, into the dark mysteries of her soundless waters. Yes, I say it again, as you should have been. Surely there are worlds beyond this one, realms of thought untouched by the crowd, visions unspoiled by the dry reasoning of the sophist. And if so, who shall dare to question your course? Who will censure you for the long hours you surrender to reverie, or call wasted those labors of the mind which were but the outpouring of your boundless and eternal energies? It was in Venice, beneath that vaulted passage known as the Ponte di Sospiri, the Bridge of Sighs, that I encountered you for what must have been the third or perhaps the fourth time. The details of that meeting return to me only in fragments, like scenes half-remembered from a dream. Yet one thing is vivid, how could it fade from my memory? The stillness of the midnight hour, the haunted beauty of the Bridge of Sighs, the presence of a woman whose loveliness seemed a living poem, and the very spirit of romance itself wandering up and down the narrow canal. The night was shrouded in a darkness more oppressive than usual, as though the very heavens had drawn down a thick and mournful veil over Venice. From the high tower of the piazza, the great clock had tolled the 5th hour of the Italian evening, its measured voice echoing solemnly over the silent stones. The broad square at the foot of the campanile lay utterly still, as if emptied of life. Even the faint stirrings of the lagoon seemed hushed. In the noble old ducal palace, whose towering facade had looked upon centuries of splendor and intrigue, the lights, few and far between, were guttering out one by one, their golden glow fading into the heavy gloom. I was on my way homeward, steering by gondola from the Piazzetta toward the Grand Canal. The oar dipped rhythmically into the water, and all was calm, until, as we glided past the shadowed mouth of the Canal San Marco, a sudden sound tore through the silence. From the darkness of that narrow waterway burst a single, piercing cry, a woman's voice, high-pitched, shrill with terror, drawn out into a wild and unbroken wail. It rang through the night like the very note of despair, vibrating in the still air long after it should have ceased. The shock of it struck me to my very core. I leapt to my feet instinctively, straining to see into the black recesses of the canal. My gondolier, equally startled, lost his hold upon the long single oar, which slipped from his grasp and vanished instantly into the suffocating darkness of the water, irretrievable. Bereft of its guiding hand, our vessel surrendered itself to the current, which at this point flowed steadily from the broader channel into the smaller one. We drifted, slow and inevitable, like some dark-winged vulture lowering toward its prey, down, ever down, toward the arch of the Ponte di Sospiri, the Bridge of Sighs. Then, all at once, the night's sepulchral gloom was broken. From the great windows and sweeping staircases of the ducal palace, a sudden blaze erupted. 1,000 torches flared to life, spilling their crimson gold light upon the marble, scattering wild reflections across the water, and transforming the deep darkness into a ghastly, unnatural day. The cause of the tumult revealed itself with tragic swiftness. A small child, torn from the safety of its mother's embrace, had slipped from an upper window of that towering edifice and plunged into the cold depths of the canal below. The water had swallowed the little body with chilling composure, closing over it without so much as a ripple to betray its resting place. Though my own gondola was the only craft within immediate view, the surface of the canal was already disturbed by many heads, sturdy swimmers from nearby, diving and resurfacing in desperate search. Yet all their frantic movements availed nothing, the little form they sought lay far beneath, hidden in the dark stillness of the abyss. Upon the great slabs of polished black marble at the palace's watergate, just a few paces above where the tide lapped against the steps, stood a figure burned forever into the memory of every witness. She was the Marchesa Aphrodite, Venice's own living jewel, the one name upon every tongue at court and carnival. Her beauty was without rival, even in a city where beauty was as common as the lapping of the waves. She was the joy of every festivity, the heart of every intrigue, yet also the young bride of the aged and cunning Mentoni. And she was the mother, the only mother, of that fair and fragile child now vanishing into the black waters below. One could almost see the image in the mind's eye, the boy's last thoughts clinging to the sweetness of her kisses, his tiny limbs straining and flailing against the unyielding current, his faint voice, never to be heard, struggling to cry her name as the darkness claimed him. She stood alone, utterly alone. The white stone platform seemed emptied of all but her solitary, motionless form. Her feet, small, bare, and pale as moonlit ivory, caught the torchlight in fleeting gleams, their whiteness reflected in the polished black marble at her feet, as if she stood upon a still, dark mirror. About her head, hair of rich and shadowy hue was only half released from its elaborate arrangement for the ball. The diamond pins and ornaments, still fastened here and there, sparkled in the lamplight like fragments of the Milky Way caught in the coils of her tresses. Those tresses fell in loose, natural curls, clusters of ringlets such as the poets likened to the young tendrils of the hyacinth, framing a face at once classical in outline and suffused with a mournful beauty. Her body was wrapped, if such a term can be used, in the thinnest and most vapor-like of garments. The robe, white as fresh snow and sheer as mist, clung about her with scarcely more substance than the air itself. Yet the night's heat, midsummer's suffocating embrace, was heavy, oppressive, and utterly still. Not even the faintest breeze stirred the folds of her attire. She might have been a statue wrought in some living marble, as motionless as the grief-stricken Niobe, around whom the sculpted draperies forever hang, weighty and cold. And yet, most strange to observe, those great, luminous eyes of hers were not fixed downward, not directed toward the waters beneath, where her beloved child, her one and only, lay struggling in silence against death. Instead, they were lifted and held with an unwavering steadiness upon an entirely different scene. Across the narrow canal rose the grim and magnificent facade of the ancient prison of the Old Republic, surely the most imposing structure in all Venice. But what power could it have now to hold her gaze so firmly? What could be found in that darkened wall, in that shadowed niche yawning blackly opposite her chamber window, that could compete, in this moment, with the desperate reality at her feet? She had seen its solemn cornices 1,000 times. She had traced the winding ivy across its stones, had pondered its melancholy grandeur by daylight and moonlight alike. Why, then, should it claim her sight now, when her very soul was drowning with her child? And yet, perhaps, it was no mystery at all. For grief does not see as the clear mind sees. In the hour of despair, the eye becomes a broken mirror, scattering the image of its sorrow into 100 fragments, so that one sees tragedy everywhere, in the near, in the far, in what is and in what is not. The anguish that lies closest to the heart seems to echo in distant forms and alien places, as though the whole world had become a reflection of the same woe. Higher up the marble steps, within the vast arch of the Watergate, another figure stood, a sharp contrast to the marble-still Marchesa. It was her husband, the Marchese Mentoni himself, dressed in all the finery of the evening's festivities. His tall frame leaned carelessly against the masonry. In his hands was a guitar, upon whose strings he idly strummed with an air of studied indifference. His face, satyr-like in its mingling of shrewdness and sensuality, betrayed not the wild agony of a father in peril, but the weary ennui of a man faintly inconvenienced. From time to time, with a bored intonation, he called out brief orders to those searching in the canal, his voice sounding less urgent than one might use in requesting a fresh glass of wine. As for myself, I remained rooted in the spot where the first terrible cry had frozen me. From the instant that voice had pierced the darkness, I had risen to my feet, and so I stayed, rigid, motionless, transfixed. The current had borne my gondola silently into the midst of the scene, and there I drifted, a pale and solitary figure in that funereal vessel. To the eyes of those gathered at the water's edge, my stillness and ashen face must have seemed ghostly, an apparition summoned by the night's calamity, gliding soundlessly to bear witness to the tragedy. All efforts were failing. The once urgent cries and splashes in the dark waters had grown weaker, their vigor sapped by despair. One by one, even the strongest swimmers slackened their strokes, their breath coming in weary gasps, and the canal lay once more heavy with silence, broken only by the faint ripple of the current. Hope for the child seemed all but extinguished, though still greater was the hopelessness for the mother, standing motionless above. And then, suddenly, from the depths of that shadowy niche I have already spoken of, the one that forms a part of the old Republican prison and faces directly toward the Marchesa's window, a figure emerged. It stepped forward slowly at first, its outline wrapped entirely in a heavy cloak, the features obscured by the dimness. The light from the torches reached it only as it paused for a single heartbeat upon the lip of the dizzy, precipitous descent. Without hesitation, it sprang outward, downward, vanishing into the black water with a single fluid plunge. A moment later, the surface broke again. Out of the cold and murky depths rose the same cloaked figure, now holding aloft, secure in one strong arm, the still-breathing body of the child. In a few swift movements, the rescuer reached the broad marble flagstones beside the Marchesa herself. The heavy cloak, drenched through, clung like lead to the man's frame, then slipped loose and fell in sodden folds about his feet. And there, before the astonished crowd, was revealed the form of a strikingly handsome young man, scarcely more than a boy in years, but whose name, even then, was being spoken in admiration across much of Europe. Not a single word passed his lips. He simply stood, the rescued child in his arms, as though the act itself needed no declaration. But the Marchesa, surely now, her arms would open wide. Surely she would seize her child, draw it fiercely to her breast, and cover its face with the frantic kisses of relief. Yet no, another stepped forward first. Before she could even move, the little one was taken from the stranger by another's hands, borne swiftly away toward the palace, unnoticed by all but a few who watched in bewilderment. And the Marchesa, what of her? Her lips trembled, those perfect lips whose beauty was often the talk of salons. Tears began to form, soft and shining, in her eyes, eyes which, like the acanthus leaves Pliny praised, were tender and liquid with life. Yes, tears now brimmed and swelled, as though the statue had awakened. It was as if a pulse had run through marble. The pale, still mask of her face flushed suddenly with a deep and uncontrollable crimson, her bosom heaved in a wave of emotion, and even her bare feet, pure as carved alabaster, seemed to warm into living flesh. A shiver passed lightly over her frame, delicate as the faint breeze of Naples trembling among silver lilies in the grass. Why should she blush so fiercely? Why, in such a moment of public tragedy and rescue, should her gaze burn with such wild appeal? The only obvious answer was an innocent one, that in the panic of a mother's instinct, she had fled her private chamber without a thought for appearances. She had come bare of slippers for her dainty feet, bare of any shawl for her graceful Venetian shoulders. That, surely, must be the cause, or so propriety would insist. Yet, was it? What else, then, could explain the restless rise and fall of her breast? The trembling, convulsive clasp of her slender hand, one which, as the Marchese Mentoni turned to retreat into the palace, happened to fall, whether by accident or impulse, upon the hand of the stranger? What else could explain the low, hurried voice in which she spoke her parting words to him, a tone so quiet it might have been stolen by the murmur of the water? I caught them, at least, I think I did, though the voice of the canal might have deceived me. Thou hast conquered, she said. 1 hour after sunrise, we shall meet, so let it be. By the time the last ripple of excitement had ebbed away, the palace lay once more in deep stillness. The torches had been extinguished, the windows that only moments ago had glowed with light now stared dark and silent into the Venetian night. On the broad marble flags by the canal, the young stranger, whom I now recognized beyond doubt, stood utterly alone. His entire frame shook, as if the very air about him carried some electric agitation. His eyes darted restlessly from point to point, searching the shadows along the water for the shape of a gondola. It seemed impossible, in such a moment, not to extend my own service. I stepped forward, offering him the use of my craft, and he accepted without hesitation, though with the briefest nod of acknowledgement. At the watergate I procured an oar, and together we embarked into the dim labyrinth of the canal. As the gondola slid away from the scene, the stranger's breathing slowed, his tremor faded, and the tightness in his movements began to ease. The composure he had so suddenly lost at the palace returned to him with equal swiftness, and before long he was speaking with an air of cordiality about our earlier, passing acquaintance, an acquaintance so slight that it would scarcely have justified the warmth of his tone. There are certain matters I take a deliberate pleasure in describing with precision, and the man's appearance, this figure still unknown to most of the world, is one of them. His stature, at first glance, seemed a shade below the average height, yet in moments of strong excitement, when the whole energy of his nature surged to the surface, his frame appeared to dilate, lending him a presence almost imposing. His build was light, bordering on slender, a form that suggested not the immovable strength of a colossus but the quick, sure agility of a fencer or a dancer, the very quality he had displayed so decisively upon the Bridge of Sighs. And yet, those who knew him in more perilous circumstances could attest that he could summon, without apparent strain, a force that in others would have been the product of fierce exertion. His mouth and chin were of that perfect, godlike modeling that one sees only in sculpture, clean and sharply cut, yet full of vitality. His eyes, those eyes, were of a kind not easily fixed in a single description. They were large, liquid, and changeful, their hue shifting under the play of light from the warm amber of hazel to a darkness as deep and glittering as obsidian. Above them, a wealth of curling black hair fell loosely, parting now and then to reveal a broad, pale forehead, gleaming like ivory beneath the night. His features as a whole possessed a classical harmony. Indeed, I could think of none more perfectly proportioned, save perhaps the marble likeness of the Emperor Commodus in the Capitoline collection. And yet, here was the paradox, his face, for all its symmetry, was strangely elusive. It was of the sort that every person has encountered once in life, a visage that stirs a faint and haunting recollection, even in a first meeting, yet vanishes from memory the instant it is gone, leaving behind only a restless yearning to call it back. It was not that his passions lacked intensity, far from it. In moments of feeling, each emotion stamped itself vividly upon his features, turning them into a living canvas for anger, joy, pity, or resolve. But when the moment passed, the face cleared like a mirror wiped of breath, retaining no trace, no lingering signature of what had been. When we parted after the strange events of that night, he pressed me, almost with a sense of urgency that bordered on command, to visit him at an early hour the following morning. His tone was one I could hardly disregard, and so, with the first flush of daylight still clinging to the waters of the lagoon, I made my way to his residence. The building itself rose like a shadowed colossus above the Grand Canal, not far from the Rialto, a vast and ancient palazzo whose facade combined the severe dignity of old Venetian stonework with a fantastical irregularity that made it seem half fortress, half dream. From the canal's edge, the upper windows caught the young sunlight in brief glimmers, but the lower floors lay in a gloom that deepened the impression of mystery. Once admitted, I was led up a broad and winding staircase, the steps inlaid with mosaics that seemed to ripple beneath my feet as I ascended. The ascent ended at a pair of heavy doors, which, when thrown open by a silent servant, allowed a flood of radiance to strike my vision so abruptly that for a moment I could scarcely see. The sheer blaze of splendor within was almost a physical force. It made my head swim, my eyes ache, and my very sense of balance falter, as though I had stepped from the cool shadows of Venice into some fevered palace of the East. I had always known, at least, I had been told, that my acquaintance was a man of enormous means. Rumor had described his wealth in terms so grandiose I had dismissed them as idle exaggerations. Yet now, confronted by the tangible proof before me, I found myself at a loss to imagine how any mere subject of a European crown could amass, much less display, magnificence on such a scale. Though morning had already broken over the city, the chamber glowed with an artificial brilliance as if night still reigned outside. The fact, combined with the drawn and almost fevered aspect of my host when he greeted me, convinced me that he had not slept at all since our encounter. The room itself was a deliberate assault upon the senses, its design conceived less to soothe or harmonize than to overwhelm and astonish. No single style or national tradition governed its adornment. One's gaze might fall first upon a grotesque painted in the harsh, vivid manner of ancient Greek artisans, then upon a serene marble from the zenith of Italian sculpture, only to be drawn next to the massive, primitive carvings of Egypt's earliest dynasties. The effect was bewildering, each treasure magnificent in itself, yet each seemingly placed without concern for relation to its neighbors, so that the eye wandered restlessly, unable to settle. From every quarter, heavy folds of sumptuous drapery quivered faintly, stirred by the invisible breath of low, mournful music whose source I could not discover. Exotic scents, rich, strange, and mingling in curious dissonance, rose in slow wreaths from intricately wrought censers of twisted metal. Here and there, flames of unnatural hue, emerald, amethyst, and violet, flickered in 100 little glass cups, their light darting and flaring across gold and marble. And then, as if to mock this dreamlike illumination, the newborn sun sent its own crimson rays through vast windows, each composed of a single pane of tinted glass. Those beams struck the silver torrent folds of the curtains, scattered into 1,000 shifting reflections, and finally came to rest in great, molten pools of mingled light upon a carpet woven from the costliest cloth of Chile gold, which shone beneath the foot like liquid metal caught mid-flow. The natural and the artificial, the morning and the midnight, mingled in that place with a strange and almost oppressive grandeur, as though time itself had been suspended in service to his wealth. Ha! 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 The sound rang out in quick, almost theatrical peals as my host, the master of the palazzo, greeted me. He waved me toward a seat with an easy, sweeping motion, then flung himself down at full length upon a vast ottoman, his laughter lingering in the air like an echo. "I see," he began, noting my momentary hesitation and the awkwardness with which I tried to interpret such an unconventional reception. "I see perfectly well that you are staggered, utterly confounded, by what you behold. My statues, my paintings, the entire originality of my conception in both architecture and upholstery, The whole has quite intoxicated you, has it not? Positively drunk on my magnificence?" Here he allowed his voice to soften suddenly into a warm, almost apologetic cordiality. "But forgive me, my dear sir, yes, forgive me for my unseasonable laughter. You look so completely astounded, so delightfully overwhelmed, that my sense of the ridiculous got the better of me. Besides, there are certain things in this world so extravagantly absurd that a man must either laugh or perish of the strain upon his nerves. To die laughing, why, sir, what end could be more splendidly enviable? Sir Thomas More, you will recall, a man of admirable wit and intellect, met precisely such a fate. And, if memory serves, in the absurdities of Revisius Textor there is recorded an entire procession of personages who made their exit from the stage of life in the same boisterous fashion." His eyes grew momentarily distant, as though some curious association had seized him. Do you know, by the way, he went on, that in ancient Sparta, modern Palyakori, to be exact, there exists, to the west of the old citadel, amid a heap of scarcely discernible ruins, a kind of stone base, a socle, upon which the letters lambda alpha xim may still be traced? These, beyond question, are the fragmentary remains of the word gamma epsilon lambda alpha xim alpha, laughter. Imagine it! In a city that once boasted 1,000 temples and shrines dedicated to 1,000 gods and goddesses, it is the altar of laughter alone that has withstood the wreck of centuries. Is that not a marvelous irony? Then, as abruptly as a change in wind, his manner shifted once more, growing more intimate and intent. But no, on this occasion I have no license to indulge in merriment at your expense. Your astonishment was perfectly natural, perhaps inevitable. Europe, I tell you, holds nothing to rival this small, regal cabinet of mine. The rest of my apartments? Mere conventionalities, shallow echoes of what is deemed fashionable, yet to my mind, insipid to the point of nausea. This room, however, this is no fashion, this is beyond it. Am I not right? And yet, the danger of beauty, it would become a universal rage if once shown to society, at least among those who could sacrifice their entire fortunes for the sake of imitating it. I have taken precautions, you see, against such vulgar imitation. Apart from one solitary exception, you are the only living soul, beyond myself and my valet, permitted to set foot in these imperial precincts since they were adorned as you behold them now. I inclined my head in silent acknowledgement. Words seemed inadequate, stifled as they were by the heady perfume in the air, the strange, unseen music that trembled through the walls, and the bewildering splendor on every side. The man's manner, so quick to shift from mockery to solemnity, from jest to pride, left me equally at a loss to answer. Here, he continued, rising now and taking my arm as though we were old friends strolling through a gallery, you see an unbroken sweep of art, from the finest Greek masters to Cimabue, and from Cimabue to our own present day. I confess that in my choices I have paid little homage to the orthodox decrees of the virtuosi. Yet every piece here, whether revered by critics or scorned by them, suits the rich, luxurious tapestry of this chamber. Here, too, you will find masterpieces whose creators remain unknown, their works overlooked by history, their names lost, except to me, who rescued them from oblivion. And here, unfinished visions left behind by once famous hands, men celebrated in their own lifetimes but abandoned now by the blind ingratitude of the academies. He stopped suddenly before a canvas, turning to me with an air of sudden challenge. Tell me, what think you of this Madonna della Pietà? I had been gazing at the work intently, my breath caught by its beauty. It is Guido's own! I exclaimed, the enthusiasm breaking from me almost involuntarily. Guido's own hand! But how could you have secured it? She is, in painting, what the Venus is in sculpture, perfection itself. Ah, he murmured, his expression growing contemplative. The Venus, the fair Venus of the Medici? The one with the diminutive head and the gilded locks? My dear sir, part of her left arm, and all of the right, are restorations. And it is precisely in the coquettish turn of that right arm that one finds, I think, the distilled essence of all affectation. No, give me Canova. And the Apollo, there can be no doubt it is a mere copy. Blind fool that I am, that I cannot discern the so-called divine inspiration in that statue. Forgive me, but I cannot help, pity me if you must, I cannot help preferring the Antinous. He paused, his eyes glimmering with a curious mix of defiance and amusement. Was it not Socrates, after all, who declared that the sculptor merely discovers his statue already sleeping within the block of marble? Then what of Michelangelo's proud couplet? Non hai all'attimo artista alcun concetto. Che un marmo solo in esse non circonscriva? Merely a later echo of the same truth. It is often noted, and rightly so, that in the bearing of a true gentleman there exists a subtle distinction from the manners of the vulgar, a difference so evident to the instinctive perception, and yet so elusive to precise definition, that we recognize it without always being able to describe it. In the case of my acquaintance, I had already observed this refined distinction in his outward demeanor, but on that memorable morning it seemed to manifest itself even more strikingly in the cast of his mind and the peculiarities of his inner character. If I were compelled to describe the singular quality of spirit that so clearly set him apart from all other men I had known, I should call it a habit of intense, unremitting thought, a constant and penetrating reflection that infused itself into every gesture, every glance, every word he spoke. It seemed to linger even in his lightest moments of pleasure, to twist itself through his idlest amusements, and to gleam unexpectedly in his bursts of laughter, much as the serpentine shapes of stone, coiled and writhing, appear from the hollow eyes of grinning masks carved in the cornices of Persepolitan temples. And yet, as I conversed with him, I could not help but notice, again and again, that this union of levity and solemnity in his discourse was not seamless. Beneath his rapid, almost careless commentary on trifling matters, there ran an undercurrent of restless agitation, a nervous intensity in both manner and speech that defied easy explanation. There was in his voice, in his gestures, a certain tremulous energy, as though every nerve were strung to an unnatural pitch. On some occasions, it was so marked that it awakened in me a vague and involuntary apprehension, as though his agitation were born of some hidden cause more serious than mere temperament. At times, in the midst of a sentence, one which had begun with the appearance of deliberate purpose, he would suddenly falter, the thread of his thought apparently slipping away from him. Then, with a fixed and concentrated gaze, he would stand listening, in profound silence, as though he expected the approach of someone whose arrival he dreaded, or as though his attention were caught by faint and mysterious sounds that existed nowhere but in the recesses of his own imagination. It was in the midst of one of those intervals, those strange, sudden lapses into reverie, when my companion's speech would falter, and his eyes grow fixed, as though he listened to voices inaudible to me, that my own idle wandering attention fell upon a volume resting carelessly upon the rich cushions of an ottoman near at hand. It was the Orfeo of Politian, known to the learned as the first tragedy ever conceived and written in the Italian tongue by a native hand, a work full of poetic grace and, here and there, of that dangerous beauty which intoxicates even as it wounds. Almost without thinking, I began to turn its leaves, when my eye was arrested by a passage in the latter part of the third act, lines of such deep and irresistible pathos that they seemed to quiver in the air like music still vibrating from a struck chord. Though undeniably touched by the moral blemish of the age in which they were written, the passage held a power over the heart such as few men could read without an unfamiliar thrill passing through their veins, and no woman could encounter without the unbidden sigh rising from her bosom. Yet what startled me most was not the beauty of the text itself, but the signs of recent and profound emotion it had evoked. The entire page was marred and blurred by the moisture of tears, tears so freshly fallen that they had not yet fully dried. Across from it, upon the facing leaf, I found a series of verses in English, written, as I had first thought, in a hand wholly different from the delicate, precise characters my acquaintance usually employed, so different indeed that I doubted for a moment whether they were his at all. But a closer examination convinced me that they were, only ere the penmanship bore marks of haste, of agitation, perhaps even of physical weakness, as if the hand had trembled beneath the weight of the heart. The verses themselves spoke with a mournful candor that seemed wrung from the very depths of a soul wounded beyond healing. They told of a love once all-consuming, described as a solitary green all upon the vast sea, a fountain of freshness, a shrine crowned with blossoms and fruits of fairy beauty, where every bloom had been the poet's own. Yet this vision, too bright to endure, had been extinguished, the star of hope, which had risen so radiantly, had been quenched beneath dark clouds. The voice of the future still urged onward, but the spirit hovered speechless and stunned above the chasm of the past. In images both grand and desolate, the lines lamented the irrevocable loss, the light of life gone forever, the sea itself whispering in solemn refrain, no more, no more, no more, the thunder-shattered tree destined never to bloom again, the eagle struck down, never to rise upon the wind. Waking hours were now but trances, and nightly dreams were haunted by the vision of dark, glancing eyes and the gleam of a beloved footstep, phantoms dancing in celestial measure along Italian waters. The final stanzas deepened into bitterness, cursing the fatal hour when she had been borne away, across the billows, from love into the arms of age, of vice, of rank without virtue, to a couch unholy and a destiny stained. She was torn from him, and from the dim, mist-veiled climate of his own land, where the silver willow bends and weeps, a tree whose sorrow seemed to echo his own. The fact that these verses were composed in English, a tongue I had not supposed their author to command, caused me, strangely enough, no real astonishment. I was too well acquainted with the breadth of his learning, and with the curious delight he often took in disguising or withholding his accomplishments, to be surprised at discovering yet another proof of his secret erudition. What did strike me, however, was the place from which the poem appeared to have been dated. At first, plainly written, the word London had afterwards been carefully and heavily overwritten, as though to conceal it, yet the obliteration was imperfect, and to a searching eye, the original letters were still plainly visible. This small revelation startled me greatly. I recalled distinctly that, during an earlier conversation with a mutual friend, I had inquired whether my companion had ever met, while in London, the Marchesa di Mentoni, who, before her marriage, had long resided there. His reply, as I remembered it, had clearly suggested that he had never visited the capital of Great Britain at all. I may as well add here that I had more than once heard it whispered, though the rumor was too improbable to command my belief, that he was not only English by descent, but had also received his education in England itself. Without any awareness that I had been silently reading the tragedy, or noting its tear-stained pages, he broke the quiet with sudden speech. "There is one painting you have not yet seen," he said. And, with a swift gesture, he drew aside a heavy fold of drapery, revealing a full-length portrait of the Marchesa Aphrodite. No mortal skill, I thought, could have rendered more perfectly the unearthly loveliness of her form. It was the same radiant, ethereal figure I had beheld the night before, standing on the marble steps of the ducal palace, bathed in the glow of lamplight and moonlight mingled. Yet here, in the painted semblance, there was added to her smiling features a faint, elusive shadow of melancholy, a paradox inseparable, it seemed to me, from all ideal beauty. Her right arm lay folded across her bosom, while her left extended downward, the slender hand indicating an ornate, singularly shaped vase. One small, delicate foot rested lightly on the ground, scarcely touching it, and about her shoulders, so dimly defined that one might doubt their reality, shimmered the most delicately conceived pair of wings, like a dream of an angel. As my gaze passed from the portrait to the living figure of my friend, the grave, powerful lines of Chapman's Bussy d'Amboise sprang unbidden to my lips. He is up there like a Roman statue. He will stand till death hath made him marble. At length, he turned away from the painting and approached a table of massive silver, richly enameled, on which stood several goblets, each strangely tinted, as well as two large Etruscan vases, wrought in precisely the same unusual design as the one in the painting, and brimming with what I took to be Johannisberger wine. "Come," he said abruptly, "let us drink. It is early, but let us drink." "Yes, early indeed," he repeated musingly, as a cherub figure, bearing a great golden hammer, struck the hour, 1 o'clock after sunrise, upon some unseen mechanism, the chime ringing through the chamber. "It is early, yet what does it matter? Let us drink. Let us offer a libation to that solemn sun whose glory these gaudy lamps and censers strive so vainly to outshine." He handed me a cup and, after I had pledged him, drained several goblets in rapid succession. Then, raising one of the magnificent vases so that the flicker of a nearby censer played upon its surface, he resumed in a desultory, half-meditative tone that seemed native to him. "To dream," he said, "has been the business of my existence. Therefore I have built for myself, as you see, a bower fit for dreams. Tell me, in all Venice, could I have found a fairer place for it? You may see here a mingling of every style and age, the purity of Ionia jarred against the monstrous shapes of the time before the flood, while the sphinxes of Egypt recline upon golden carpets. But such incongruities offend only the timid. Mankind is overawed by the petty proprieties of place and, above all, of time, mere bugbears that frighten them away from contemplating the truly magnificent. I once held the narrow creed of the decorous, but that refined folly has long since cloyed upon my soul. Now I find the very disorder, the strange clash of forms and epochs, better suited to my purpose. See, like these arabesque censers, my spirit is twisting in its own fire, and the delirium of my surroundings is shaping me for yet wilder visions, visions of that land of ultimate dreams, to which I am even now hastening." Here he stopped abruptly, bent forward, and seemed to listen with an intensity that stilled the air. I could hear nothing. Presently he straightened himself, lifted his eyes upward, and, in a voice low yet resolute, recited the lines of the Bishop of Chichester. "Stay for me there. I will not fail to meet thee in that hollow vale." In the very next moment, acknowledging the overpowering influence of the wine, he flung himself at full length upon a richly cushioned ottoman, his movements languid yet decisive, as though yielding himself to some final, inevitable repose. Before I could address him further, the sound of a rapid footstep echoed upon the staircase, each tread growing sharper and nearer, until a loud and urgent knock resounded at the chamber door. I moved swiftly to prevent what I feared might be a second and needless interruption, but the door burst open before my hand could reach it. Into the room rushed a page from the household of Mentoni, his youthful face ashen, his breath ragged with panic. In a voice broken by sobs and almost strangled by horror, he stammered forth disjointed cries. My mistress, poisoned, poisoned! Oh, beautiful Aphrodite!" Dazed, I turned instantly towards the ottoman, striving to rouse my friend and force upon him the dreadful tidings. But the instant my hand touched him, I knew my efforts were vain. His limbs were locked in the stillness of stone, his lips had faded to a ghastly hue, and the brilliant light of his eyes, so full of strange life a moment before, was fixed and glassy in the rigidity of death. Reeling backward, I instinctively reached out to steady myself, my fingers brushing against the goblet on the table. It was cracked, blackened, and warm to the touch. In that instant, like a sudden blaze illuminating the darkest recess of the mind, the whole fearful truth sprang into my consciousness, complete, undeniable, and terrible.